The first bartender was not a human. He was not technically anything you'd recognize. He had no bar, no license, and no idea what he was doing. He was a single-celled fungus, floating on the skin of a piece of fruit, quietly turning sugar into alcohol for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with getting anyone drunk. And roughly 10 million years before the first human ever lifted a cup, something walked up to that fruit, sniffed it, and made a decision that we are, right now, tonight, in bars across the entire planet, still making. We tend to assume we invented alcohol, that some clever ancestor, some genius in an animal skin, cracked the code one afternoon and handed the world beer. It's a nice story. It is also completely wrong. And the real one is so much stranger. Because ancient humans didn't invent drinking. They inherited it. The craving was already inside us, written into our blood, long before we had the hands to build a single cup. So the real question was never when did we start drinking? It's when did we finally catch up to a thirst that was already 10 million years old? To figure that out, we have to answer 3 things, and each one is stranger than the last. First, where did the craving actually come from? And why does the human body seem to have been built for booze before there were any humans to drink it? Second, who was the very first ancient human to make alcohol on purpose? And what they did with it quietly rewrites everything we assumed about why civilization began. And third, the part almost nobody talks about. What if the entire modern world, the farms, the cities, all of it, exists because some ancient humans really, really wanted a drink? Stay with me, because by the end of this, the glass in your hand is going to look a lot older than you are. Let's go back, way back, long before the stick figures on this channel had learned to do anything useful at all, before fire, before language, before the tragic invention of the working week. Here's the thing nobody tells you about alcohol. It doesn't need us. It never did. Leave a ripe piece of fruit alone, and it will make its own. Wild yeast lands on the skin, eats the sugar inside, and breathes out ethanol. That's fermentation. It has been happening on this planet for far longer than anything with a face has been around to enjoy it. Which means our ancient ancestors, the small fruit-eating primates we all climbed down from, lived in a world that was gently and constantly brewing. Every overripe fruit on the forest floor was, in a very technical sense, a tiny abandoned cocktail. And they could smell it. Ethanol is a light, restless molecule. It drifts. It carries on the wind. So to a hungry primate, the smell of alcohol wasn't the smell of a party. It was the smell of food. Ripe, sugar-loaded, high-calorie food, announcing its exact location from across the forest. This is the idea a UC Berkeley biologist named Robert Dudley calls the drunken monkey hypothesis, that our deep species-wide fondness for alcohol began as a survival instinct. The scent of booze was the world's oldest dinner bell. Our ancestors weren't attracted to alcohol because they wanted to get drunk. They were attracted to it because the things that smelled like alcohol tended to keep them alive. Which is a very noble, very scientific way of saying that we have been walking toward the smell of fermentation for millions of years and calling it good instincts. But smelling the fruit is one thing. Eating it without falling out of a tree is another problem entirely. Because alcohol, in any real quantity, is a poison. A small primate that got genuinely drunk in the canopy was a small primate that was about to have a very short, very educational fall. For most of our evolutionary history, our ancestors simply couldn't process the stuff. Their bodies barely knew what to do with it. And then, about 10 million years ago, one of them changed. Scientists, led by a paleogeneticist named Matthew Kerrigan, did something remarkable. They reached back through 70 million years of primate evolution and resurrected an ancient enzyme, a molecule called ADH4, the very first thing in your body that goes to work the moment alcohol hits your system. They rebuilt old versions of it in the lab, and they tested how well each one could break down ethanol. For most of that history, the answer was badly. Our early tree-dwelling ancestors had a version about ADH4 that handled alcohol slowly and poorly. But right around 10 million years ago, in the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, a single mutation appeared. One tiny change, and it made the enzyme roughly 40 times better at metabolizing ethanol. 40 times. Overnight, in evolutionary terms, our ancestors gained a superpower, and it was, essentially, the ability to hold their liquor. And the timing is the beautiful part. This is almost exactly when our ancestors were coming down out of the trees and starting to spend their time on the ground. And the ground is where the really ripe, really rotten, really boozy fruit ends up. It falls, it sits, it ferments in the sun. So picture the scene. An entire forest floor littered with free calories that every other animal was too woozy to touch. And one ape, one, who could walk up, eat the fermented fruit that would have floored its competitors, and stroll away perfectly fine. That ape ate. That ape survived. That ape had children. We are those children. Natural selection, in other words, spent 10 million years quietly breeding a primate that could outdrink the room, which means that before we were human, before we had a language, a name, or a single bad idea to our species, we were already built from the enzyme up to consume alcohol. We just hadn't figured out how to make our own yet. And for almost that entire 10 million years, that's the strange part, we didn't. Sit with that. For millions upon millions of years, our ancestors had the craving and the biology and the taste, and they did absolutely nothing about it, except wait around for yeast to do the work for them, like the world's most patient freeloaders. We were a species with a deep genetic thirst and zero initiative. The leap, the moment that separates us from every drunken monkey that came before, isn't the drinking, it's the making. The day an ancient human looked at a pile of grain, understood what the yeast was going to do, and decided to help. That's the moment we're actually hunting for. And when archaeologists finally found the first hard evidence of it, it turned up in the last place anyone was looking. A cave, full of the dead. The place is called Rakefet Cave, tucked into the hills near what's now Haifa in Israel. And around 13,000 years ago, it belonged to a people archaeologists call the Natufians, hunter-gatherers, right on the knife's edge of settling down, right before farming was a thing anyone did. In 2018, a team led by the Stanford archaeologist Li Liu examined 3 ancient stone mortars from that cave, heavy stone basins carved into the rock. They weren't even looking for alcohol. They were trying to work out what these people ate. But when they analyzed the residue trapped in the stone, they found the microscopic fingerprints of wheat and barley that had been malted, mashed, and fermented. It was beer. 13,000-year-old beer. The oldest physical evidence of humans deliberately making alcohol anywhere on Earth. Now, 2 details make this genuinely astonishing, and I need you to hold both at once. The first is where it was found. This was a burial cave, a graveyard. This beer wasn't a casual afternoon drink. It was brewed for the dead, for rituals, for feasts to send people off. The very first thing ancient humans seem to have done with alcohol wasn't to unwind after a long day of gathering. It was ceremony. Booze, right from the start, was sacred. And the second detail is the one that has quietly detonated a 60-year argument in archaeology, because this beer is older than bread farming. These people were brewing before they were reliably baking, which raises a question so simple it's almost rude. What if we didn't settle down and invent agriculture to make food? What if we settled down to make drink? The idea even has a name, beer before bread, and it suggests something that sounds like a joke, but is taken very seriously. That the thing that first tied wandering humans to one patch of land, that made us plant and harvest and stay and build the first villages, might have been the desire for a reliable supply of something to ferment. And before you decide that's a one-off, a single weird cave in the Middle East, go and look at the other side of the continent. Because 9,000 years ago, in a Neolithic village called Jiahu in China, people were doing the exact same thing, independently, with completely different ingredients. The archaeochemist Patrick McGovern analyzed the residue inside their pottery jars and reconstructed the recipe: rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or grape. A Stone Age cocktail brewed on the other end of the world by people who had never heard of the Natufians and never could.
That's not a coincidence anymore. That's a pattern. Give human beings grain or fruit or honey and enough time to notice what happens when it sits, and we will, every single time, in every corner of the planet, independently, arrive at the same conclusion. We should ferment that. So, when did ancient humans start drinking alcohol? Here's the honest answer, and the reason the question is more beautiful than it looks. It has two answers, and the entire story lives in the gap between them.
We started making it about 13,000 years ago, in a cave, for the dead. But we started drinking it 10 million years ago, as apes, with a hunger for fermentation stamped into our DNA long before we had the hands, or the minds, or the villages to do anything about it. Ancient humans didn't discover alcohol. They spent 10 million years slowly, patiently catching up to a taste they were born with. That brewery in the cave wasn't an invention. It was a homecoming. It was the moment a craving that had been waiting inside our species since before we were a species finally got the tools it had been waiting for. And here's the last turn of the knife, the part that should sit with you. That single mutation, 10 million years old, the one that let a desperate ape eat rotten fruit and survive, it never left. You still carry it. It is, right now, the reason a modern human can drink far, far more than is good for them without their body slamming on the brakes. The exact adaptation that once kept our ancestors alive is the reason their descendants can't always put the glass down. Our oldest survival tool became our oldest vice. The gift and the curse were all along the same gene. Because this was never really a story about beer. It's a story about inheritance, about how the oldest parts of us are still quietly making our decisions, millions of years after we've forgotten why they started. We built an entire civilization of taverns and vineyards and toasts and traditions on top of an instinct that first belonged to a frightened animal following a smell across a forest floor. So the next time you catch the scent of a drink, understand what you're actually smelling. Not a party. A signal, 10 million years old, that once meant food and safety and life. Your ancestors followed that smell down out of the trees. You're still following it. If you want to know what else ancient humans were quietly, disastrously up to long before they had any business doing it, subscribe. There's a whole species worth of bad decisions to get through. And we are only just getting started.